Simon Two, Athlete's Lifestyle, Nathan Butt. David Beckham with a TV interview. Communication. In an interview, David Beckham has very good communication. For example, within his answers, he is very specific and gets down to the purpose of the point. This shows he's composed and in control of the situation. As you can see in the interview he had with Jonathan Ross, his body language is perfect because he's always looking at Jonathan face to face, which shows he's engaged within the conversation and looks interested. Furthermore, if David Beckham didn't look at Jonathan and not sitting up straight, then he will come across as bored and not interested, and he won't be able to set a good example as a role model or a leader. In appearance, in an interview, David is always dressed appropriately, which will show that he's important and setting a good example of a role model. David Beckham also looks well groomed and presentable. This means the press and fans can't have anything bad to say about him because David always represents himself very well. When David was a player, he had to sit in a press conference. He had to dress differently because his duties were different, because he was representing his sponsors and the club, so he had to dress in the appropriate kit to show he's representing the club, as this shows he is a good role model. Preparation. Before David Beckham's interview, he would have done plenty of preparation so that the interview will run smoothly. So the preparation he would do will be working on his communication, so he might rehearse what he might say and have help, and this will help him with the structure of his answers. Also, other preparation David will consider will be researching the show, also making sure his posture is perfect and his body language is correct, and make sure that his appearance is correct and that he won't use any offensive slogans. Rio Ferdinand on a radio interview. Communication. This is very important because this is the only way the viewers will be able to know what you're saying and what your emotions are. Rio was interviewed before he went to the World Cup by Radio 2, and he gave very specific and straight to the point answers because he won't have a lot of time on the air. The questions that Rio knew what the questions will be about because of going to the World Cup, so was very relaxed and sound relaxed at this moment in time. He had composure, which meant the interview ran smoothly. Also, Rio had to make sure his voice was clear and has the right volume for the viewers to hear and understand. Also, Rio needed to make sure his language is spot on because the radio is also listened by children. Research. Before Rio was interviewed, he would have known the questions he was going to be asked so that he can prepare himself for the interview. This meant he can gather composure. Also, he would have known the kind of audience who will be watching, so he will need to watch his language and talk very basic and not too technical. Also, Rio would have known that the station is well known, so that it would have interested him more because this will benefit him a lot. Appearance. Before the interview, Rio won't have to worry about his appearance because no one will see him, because the viewers will only be listening to what he's saying. So the only thing Rio will be focusing on will be his personal delivery, like his speech, and if it's appropriate to the viewers. In this interview, Rio will be on the phone to the station, so he could be at home in his casual clothes and no one will know, so appearance won't matter compared to if he was on the TV, because then people will see his appearance and will also be judged on his own appearance on the TV. Significant others. Formal communication with significant others. Communicating appropriately in front of significant others in a formal situation is very important because these interviews can have an impact on your career. Firstly, an important factor an athletes need to consider will be their appearance, because they need to set a good example. So for example, if an athlete came to a meeting or an interview wearing old jogging bottoms, then this shows to the owner and sponsors that they are lazy and you don't look appropriate and don't seem like they want to be there. so this can affect them getting a new deal with the club or sponsorship. Furthermore, make sure the clothing you're wearing hasn't got any offensive images or slogans. So appropriate clothing such as a suit or a nice plain dress which isn't too revealing, because this will show you made effort and this will impress the person interviewing you. Also, an athlete will need to have good personal hygiene and make sure they took time doing their hair and looking presentable. Secondary, an athlete will need to consider another thing that an athlete will need to consider will be their communication. For example, they will need to have appropriate language because they might be talking to employers or the manager. So if they have had bad language, then they will come across as rude and disrespectful, so you could lose your place on the team and lose out on big sponsors, which will affect you financially. Furthermore, you want to be relaxed and have composure in the interview, otherwise you will seem in control and not looking like a professional who looks capable. Also, you need to make sure you're clear and have a good volume so that you are heard. This will come into having composure. An athlete will need to consider being prepared. For example, he will need to prepare for lots of different questions so that the interview will run smoothly and seem like you're confident and know what you're talking about. Furthermore, an athlete might want to consider researching the interviewer or sponsor so that they have an idea about the company. So the more you know, the more they will be impressed. So preparation is very important. Informal communication with significant others. Communicating with significant others in an informal situation is less important because this won't affect your career. When meeting with significant others in an informal situation appearance is less important because of you not being judged so much if you're going for an interview in a formal situation. However, depending on the situation and place, you should still wear appropriate clothing. For example, when arriving to training, you shouldn't wear non-inappropriate clothing because you're representing the club still, and you should always wear your practical kit in training. So in an informal situation, it's a more relaxed atmosphere, so you don't have to worry about looking well groomed. When meeting significant others in an informal situation, because it's more relaxed, then the way you communicate is going to be a lot more different to when you're meeting someone in a formal situation, because what you say isn't going to affect your career unless what you say is very inappropriate and is hurtful to others. So the way athletes speak in informal situations will be less structured and their English won't be as good. An example of this is how footballers speak to officials on the pitch. For example, a lot of players swear at the referees and no action is placed. When meeting with significant others in an informal situation, preparation is less important because you don't prepare what you're going to say or do because it's not that important to. Also, you're going to be more relaxed in the environment you're in, so you're going to be your normal self and you will find things will run more smoothly. When meeting with significant others in informal situations, research is less important because you will never research when meeting up with the manager or coaches in training or after. Furthermore, the athlete won't be informed that they will be talking to the coaches. Maybe they will take the player to the side and have a talk about his performances lately. So there will be no rehearsals or any expectations for the player to be groomed or anything like that.